Have you ever wondered, what would happen if God asked you to give up the very thing you prayed for? What if the blessing you waited years for, the miracle you cried for, the promise you held on to, was suddenly placed on the altar? Would you still trust Him? Would you still obey? Would your faith remain strong even when God's instructions made no human sense? Faith sounds powerful until it is tested. Trust sounds easy until obedience costs you everything. And this is where Abraham's story begins. Abraham was not chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because he was willing. The Bible says in the book of Genesis 12:1, "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you.'" Notice something powerful. God didn't give Abraham the full plan. He simply said, "Go." No map, no timeline, no detailed explanation. Just trust me. And Abraham obeyed. Imagine that moment, leaving behind familiarity, leaving security, leaving comfort, walking into uncertainty based only on God's voice. That is faith. Faith is not having all the answers. Faith is trusting God without them. So, Abraham left. Not because it was easy, but because he believed God's promise was greater than his fear. And then God made him a promise. A promise so big it seemed impossible. God said Abraham would become the father of many nations. But there was one problem. Abraham and Sarah had no child. Years passed, still no child. More years passed, still waiting. Can you imagine that? Holding on to God's promise while reality says otherwise. Praying, believing, waiting, when nothing seems to change. This is where many people quit. But Abraham kept believing. The Bible says in Epistle to the Romans 4:20-21, "Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised." That means Abraham trusted God even when circumstances looked impossible. And eventually, God fulfilled his promise. Isaac was born, the promised son, the miracle child, the evidence that God keeps his word. Finally, the waiting was over. Or so Abraham thought. Because sometimes, after God gives the promise, comes the test. The Bible says in book of Genesis 22:2, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him." Can you imagine hearing that? The son you waited decades for, the promise fulfilled, now placed back in God's hands. Why would God ask this? Because faith is proven when obedience becomes painful. Anyone can trust God when receiving blessings, but can you trust Him when He asks for surrender? Abraham's greatest test was not receiving the promise, it was releasing it. And Abraham obeyed. He took Isaac, he climbed the mountain, step by step, heart heavy, but faith intact. And Isaac asked, "Father, where is the lamb?" Imagine Abraham's emotions. Yet he answered, "God Himself will provide." That statement was not denial, it was faith. Even in confusion, Abraham trusted God's character. And just as Abraham raised the knife, God stopped him. "Do not lay a hand on the boy." Then God provided a ram instead. The sacrifice was never about destruction, it was about devotion. God was revealing something powerful. Abraham trusted God completely, and because of that, his faith became legendary.
So what does Abraham teach us? Sometimes God will test you, not to destroy you, but to reveal whether He truly comes first. Your faith will be tested. Your patience will be tested. Your obedience will be tested. But every test has purpose. Because when God tests your faith, He is preparing you for greater purpose. So if you are in a season where you don't understand, where obedience feels hard, where waiting feels painful, remember Abraham. Trust God even when it makes no sense. Obey God even when it costs you. Because God's promises never fail. And when the test is over, you will discover that God was never trying to take from you. He was building unshakable faith within you.